Yeah, I'll just go straight without really appreciating that we have the meeting and the call. I think I did that yesterday. So I'll come straight to the four concepts on which the issue of road wage. I'll come back to about the alliance. I don't know why actually I have to speak about that. But I do want to bring up the wage concept and some of the things that I said, and that is a concrete formulation that one can do. And one need not do the way it is being done, where it reduce the calorie content and other factors. But I'll come first to why there is such a resistance to the idea of a wage. And it is more so when it becomes a cross-national in some sense. Go back to the ILO declaration. And let's not forget, and this is one thing I want to say, that in the end of the day, when ILO declaration was made, there was an existing socialism which was fighting in the world. And so you couldn't get away from the idea of a living wage at that time. So in the preamble of the ILO convention, ILO declaration of 1949, 47 I think, or 49?
49.
Huh?
49.
49. It says minimum living wage. But by the time the minimum living wage is translated into a convention, which was in first convention, I want to come back to the first convention on minimum wage, which is almost universal except for the agriculture workers. It took almost another 30 years, almost like another 20, 1970 was the first time in ILO. Let's imagine, this we are talking was an existing socialism already existing. The global labor movement was very strong, and still the first universal minimum wage convention came in 1970. The first convention of 1949, which was the convention of only creating a machinery, not a minimum wage as a concept, or a minimum wage as that which will be almost given to every worker in the. So why I do want to say, let us not look at the wage concept as if it is just an opinion, or it's really one of the central part of any, whatever you want to say, labor struggle, class struggle, or anything, is a central part of this struggle. And it is important that when we look at the new economy, that we incorporate the struggles and the methodologies that has been evolved into the understanding of wage. To me as a unionist, and this is what I always like to say, in the end my job is to organize. In the end, my job is to help the workers to get what it deserves. I'm a political person. I'm absolutely, clearly very leftist on that. But I keep that hat off for the moment, because if I cannot translate my ideological position into a trade union formulation, it is meaningless to me. And I want to be very clear about it. I am ready to, in 1977 and against emergency, we went to jail. But that did not solve my trade union problem in the first instance, on the day-to-day of the worker. So I do want to, and I don't mean that there's no relationship, there's a very clear relationship, what my other colleagues have said. But what is important is that we incorporate some of these concepts into the very nature of wage concept. And I want to just give the issue of road wage as one of such concepts, following from what Satyaki just said. If the world total manufacturing has shifted to the global south, not only that, 80% of the global trade is no more a free trade. It's a trade between two parts of same company. It's a trade between one company here which is selling to another company. It's not even going to straight to the consumers anymore. So the point is the global supply chain. If I were to really unpack the neoliberal into a concrete framework of what impacts me, it is the global supply chain, the global production network. And that is a very significant part of what I want to say about it. And why am I saying this? Because I am a part of organizing the garment workers. And to me, the garment workers is the best index anywhere in the world of showing what happens to capital. You know, I can go to the history of it, how it moved from North of America to South of America, and from South America to Mexico, and then from Europe to Southern Europe, and how it has moved. Now, 60% of the total garment production takes place in Asia. If we don't produce, half the world will go naked. And I'm seriously saying this. So the point what is, who is doing this? Again, 80% of these are women workers in the Asia. So how can we incorporate, if you are going to really talk about relocation, which is the real threat, and I learned it for the first time. I organized one of the first garment workers in Kandla Free Trade Zone. I was good enough to be able to, my workers went on a strike and we did an agreement. But I couldn't sustain that agreement for more than 2 years because the Kandla, that supplier shifted, or not the supplier, the brand shifted the sourcing from the supplier to Bangladesh. And my workers came and told me, why did you force us to go on a strike and make an agreement when we can't sustain it? I had to answer that question myself. So I'm saying that these are all concrete problems that come from existing trade movement. So the question came up, can we build up a concept of a wage which is beyond a country? And I had to be honest, I looked at all literature. There was not a single concept of a living wage which was outside a nation state. This is after having talked globalization, talked of internationalism. There was not one a single concept of a wage which could be formulated beyond a country's jurisdiction. So we had we tried to talk to academicians. They gave us that it's impossible to do it. They made it so complicated that we didn't even know how to handle it. So we decided we'll start working on it on our own. And that's how the Asia floor wage concept. And I want to put it very simply. It's a very simple wage concept, but there are two very important parts of it. And this is where I want to go back to what I was talking yesterday. And I agree to what Sabina just said, that, just a normative, I was talking yesterday about normative, but I do believe that every normative can be concretized. It is my belief, and I believe it is possible. So when I said that when you have to concretize a normative idea, you have to start applying your brain and start thinking about it. It's not going to be just come up just because I said so. So the question came up, what can you universalize? And I'm still coming to the core question. And this is not something a very old economist, Engels, not the Marx Engels guy. This is the other Engels guy. The other Engels who gave what is called Engels law, who said that as men's income increased, they put less proportion in food. It's actually a consumption equation, which says that as a worker earns more, the amount of money he puts it is less in the food. Now it was something percentage of the income that. Now this was again said about almost like in early part of the 20th century. So whether it is true or not, we don't know. And this is my core point, that if you look at it, in 2011 there was an ILO actually a fairly global survey as to how many components of these different components of wage are robust enough to be applicable all over the globe. The only component that means the only component of the wage which could be linear, that means which had a relationship with the total amount of money to a component, was only food. So only element that can be universalized among all the components of the food, all the components of wage, was food. And that is why we decided to develop the concept of a flow wage. And because flow wage, not because it's a flow, that's because in a multinational, in a cross-country framework, there could not be any notion of a minimum wage. There could be only a concept of a flow. I want to come back to it. So we decided we will look at the universality of only one component, and that was food, because that could be only one that could be compared. And thankfully, by that time, the International Food Organization, FAO also came. They had to address the question of poverty. For the first time, the global social scientists started addressing how to define an universal idea of poverty. And thankfully, so they did a lot of research, and that's where the PPP notion came up. So many other concepts came up that helped us making a cross-country relationship. Now, in order to simplify this, I'm saying that what we did is we took the best of the norm. And I do want to comment on that. One of the last of the Asian democracies, one of the last of the Asian countries that moved from almost authoritarianism to democracy was Indonesia, right? And so ILO was called upon to decide what should be the best way of looking at it. That's the only country in the whole world, by the way, which has a notion of a living wage, and which declares living wage every year. It is not something, this is what I find the whole academic world so So this is actually happening there. For the last 5-6 years, there has been a living wage concept that has come in. And who helped in doing that? The ILO helped in making that formulation. And what is the formulation? It builds on 3,000 calories with adequate protein. This is all bunk, honestly. I'm very angry about it. When people say one can live in 2,000, if nowhere in the world has any person who's doing labor-intensive work have a calorie content which is less than 300. So they came up, that is how, and they had components of almost 40 components. I don't want to get into detail. So 3,000 calories was a concept that came up, and every element of the Asia floor wage is a legal concept, which means that it is legally valid in some parts of Asia. So when we picked up 300,000 calories, we decided that we will put it as our core concept, and we built the whole Asia floor wage, living wage, as from that point of view. That's first point. The second point is, I don't want to get again, the universal norm in India, you had said yesterday the report was 3.6. The universal norm is 3 consumption units, so we stuck to what is the universal consumption norm of 3. The most important part is, and this is again very interesting, when you reduce the consumption of the food, non-food, again I said non-food cannot be compared because actually there's no universal component of comparison. So it could only be a factor. So we decided we will make it into a fifth, which is again from the Engels law, it says that as countries move to developmental ladder, the consumption of the food consumption part reduces in the wage. So essentially what is called the developing countries or slightly better developing, middle developing countries would be roughly about 50% food component, 50% non-food component. I want to make a comment here. Yes.